Hello, everybody. Welcome. We're very fortunate today to have Pete Leyden here. Pete is the director of the New Politics Institute here in San Francisco. He's also a YouTube star, as you can see. Pete's been writing and thinking about politics and technology for a long time. I think the first big stir he made as a thinker in this space was back in 1996 when he was a managing editor of Wired magazine and wrote a really controversial cover story called The Long Boom. And it basically talked about how changes in technology combined with globalization were going to push us forward towards a new economy. Today, that just seems like a pretty basic statement, but back in 1996, it wasn't. And in fact, Wired recently came out with this issue, their 15th anniversary issue, in which they said things we got right and things that we didn't get right. And it says here the number one thing they got right was the Long Boom story by Pete Leyden on the cover back in 1996. So we're dealing with a man here who's done a lot of thinking in this intersection between politics and technology. Pete has written extensively for both Wired when he worked there, but also for Newsweek, the New York Times. Most recently, actually, he was sort of the brains behind a story about the Obama campaign and their Silicon Valley connections that was in the Atlantic Monthly. If you want to check it out, we have it up on our politics bulletin board over there where the editorial team stands. I'll turn it over to Pete, but he's essentially going to talk about politics and technology, this crazy time that we live in, and something that YouTube has sort of, without trying to, found itself right at the center of. Pete was kind enough to join us in Charleston, South Carolina for our first YouTube debate back in was it July? Man, July of last year. It seems like forever ago. And so I thought I'd start off by playing a quick video of his immediate reaction after the debate. This is in the spin room where all the candidates come and all the pundits, thinkers like Pete, journalists come to talk about, what actually happened, what took place. You can see a little Clinton sign back there where all the Clinton people stand and all the campaigns sort of do their spinning. And this was Pete.
I thought it was a big step, and we were just arguing about how far it went. And I think, actually, given what you could actually expect, it was a very big step. But taking the best of the participatory, democratized, new media and melding it with the best of, good, reasonable, sober but kind of analytical journalism, and the two together I thought really worked well. I mean, it could go a lot further. Yeah, you could, there's all these kind of possibilities that you can do and leverage these things tremendously. But I thought for today, they came together on equal terms. They melded together. They did something different that either of them alone couldn't do, and that was a big step. And it actually got to legitimize itself, and it actually was a kind of a process that was sanctioned in some respect now, crossed into a different space, and now we're in a different trend. I think that's a great thing. And what can you expect is on the first time out?
Any advice for?
We'll leave it there. Pete, thanks for joining us. Let me get over to your PowerPoint. You don't need this, do you?
I don't need that, no. Thanks, Steve. Thanks, everyone here again. It was great to be down in South Carolina. I also went to the Republican one in Florida, and that was also a very interesting one. And so I've been welcomed into your place several times, and really happy to be here again today. What I'm going to do here, this has just been an amazing campaign. People have been talking about it. But what I want to do is I want to step back and really talk about how extraordinary a moment we're in right now in American politics and really in the history of America, basically, the history of this country. There's been really a handful of times in American history where we've entered a period of explosive political innovation that really reorients the direction of the country. And it's basically literally just a handful of these times if you take the last 220 years. And I think we're basically going into one of those now. And I'm going to basically make the case here with this, and I'm going to talk to you about the totally critical role that basically technology is playing here in really spanning, in this critical juncture, this paradigm shift between two political eras. Now, you say, okay, a few times, when does this happen? Now, what happens in these extremely rare moments in politics, reorienting, fundamentally reshifting political periods, is there's usually in response to two things going on in the country. One of the things is there's deep structural changes in the economy, the fundamentals of the economy, or the fundamental way people actually live their lives. So there's something that the old politics that has been kind of hanging on just cannot deal with the deep structural changes going on in those fundamental places. And the second thing is there's usually a series of unprecedented challenges, again, that the old politics doesn't know how to deal with. And so this has been prompted, these kind of reinventions then, these kind of explosions of political innovation. They tended to last about 10, 15, 20 years, and usually they peter out after about 20 years after they've actually pushed through a kind of, again, a top to bottom often transformation of our politics and basically the way Americans organize themselves. And that is, again, what I think we're heading into now. So, but before, to kind of understand how this has worked before, once you start these things, that's the challenges, those are the kind of structural changes that force these changes. There's usually three elements that consistently surface in these historical periods. One, there's usually a new technology and new media, basically, that actually is used, helps cause a disruption, but also is one of the ways you solve the problem. The second thing is you bring new people, big core new constituencies or new kind of people into the political process. Massive, usually is around massive population changes is the second element that's going on here. And the third thing is you have an explosion of new ideas of how to deal with that era's set of challenges. Now, to kind of get what I'm saying here, the classic one we saw basically was the beginning of the 20th century here, where you basically had the movement from a kind of agrarian economy to an industrial economy, rural living and into urban living. And so right around the turn of the century, the 20th century, you had this crazy thing where the old politics of laissez-faire economy and just kind of live and let live thing had created this crazy situation that was really out of control with robber barons with huge wealth, people really with no money, extreme kind of stress in these urban centers, and all the different things that were just throwing society out of whack. Now, what happened then was an explosion of political innovation that was really what we call now the classic progressive era. It was a progressive era right around 1900, went to about 1920, right after World War I, sorry. Again, 20 years of incredible explosion of innovation. Now, the thing is, when we hear progressive today, we think, okay, we kind of orient ourselves towards Democrats. It's usually not, in historical terms, this is not a partisan thing. In fact, the classic progressive era was kicked off by Teddy Roosevelt and eventually ended up with Woodrow Wilson. Both parties had very, very progressive strains that were, again, contributing to this explosion of innovation. So what did they have there? They had those three same things I said in kind of generic terms. They had essentially a run of new tools, essentially, that was driven off of the mass, basically the mass newspapers, which was the first time this really came into being. They brought in new people, particularly urban immigrants coming in from Europe, and basically women, who again, if you know, it took 1919 until basically women got the vote, remember? So there's a ton of energy of new people, women coming into it. And ultimately they had this kind of democratization of humanization of the economy. That was the kind of the set of ideas that they had at that period. And so what you had here, again, but before this time there were newspapers, but there was no way to crank out literally tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands, even millions of these copies and drive them into these cities, which they did with these kind of newspaper kids. So this was essentially created the new media, the new kind of technology of that period there. And ultimately on the backs of that, you had that era's kind of blogosphere and everything kind of came charging in. They started to really do this transparent look at their society, expose all the ills there. Muckraking, took on the challenge, the powers that be there. And so you had a kind of a challenge through that. You also had new people coming into it, all these urban immigrants. You had this younger generation at that time. This is always a key thing too. Often young generations that come up with new kind of ideas. This is, again, one of the muckrakers there, Upton Sinclair, just as an example of people there. And the third thing you basically had is this ton of new ideas. And we forget about this, but until that time, you know, they said, hey, we got to bust up these robber baron things, which they took on. They basically established progressive income tax. There had been none until then. They basically said, you know, we got to get women to vote, unionize workers. They basically kicked in with, you know, FDA safety standards and things that, frankly, even now, China's raw economy is starting to come to terms with child labor ending. And ultimately, you got all these things. Frankly, here in California was a big progressive push towards referendum, an initiative, all the stuff that were still that brought in Schwarzenegger and all later. But that was all came together in this explosion of innovation there. The second time we saw it, and this is again just a quick setup for what we're trying to see, what's happening today, because again the parallels are all going to be here today, is the mid-20th century. There was another explosion of progressive kind of thing, and basically what that came about is kind of more of the second piece. It wasn't so much the structural changes, although we were still trying to deal with that fundamentals of the economy changes, but really it was totally new challenges that the old politics couldn't figure out. Great Depression, rise of fascism, Hitler, all this kind of stuff, communism coming up. They didn't know how to deal with it. The old way of kind of organizing politics and government just did not work. And so you had another explosion, and they had the same three things came to the fore. At that time, you had broadcast radio, the new tool, mastered early, used as a way to kind of help solve the problems. You had a whole new kind of coalition of politics that brought huge majorities starting in 1932, that was able to really transform America at that period. And you had the big new ideas of the New Deal, saving democracy, all that kind of stuff that came together in a new way that we hadn't really seen before. Now the reason, and then because of that, you had all these now this again, 32 FDR comes in. By 45, which is literally less than 15 years later, we basically, created a whole new way to kind of use Keynesian economics to intervene with the economy. We defeated fascism, set up kind of, basically the communist containment idea. We brought just from scratch United Nations, World Bank, IMF, all these ways to reorganize the way we did the global economy of that time, and ultimately all these range of programs that basically got the new society going after the post-war boom there, set it up, and ultimately expanded all these rights. Again, this all happened in a burst of innovation. If you would have said this 30 years before, or 10 years before that, people would have said this would have been ridiculous. There's no way you're going to be able to do that. Now, why is that important? Well, because we're basically in this situation now, the exact same thing's happening. What you've got is technology, these huge technological shifts that you are well aware of here, the internet, computerization of everything, that's starting to happen, driving a lot of these changes. And what you're seeing here, and again, what we'll be looking back in history books for the next 50, 100, 200 years, they're going to say what happened at the turn of the century here was the globalization of everything. That's what really the fundamental dynamic that's happening in our time. Just like from the agricultural to industrial economy, this is such a fundamental rework of the economy and society that it's essentially prompting all these new challenges, which is this 21st century range of challenges, climate change, globalization of the economy, global pandemics, things that we had no kind of way of even kind of conceptualizing before, because it's just purely a kind of they're unprecedented challenges. So what's happening, though, right on cue, is we've got the same three drivers in politics that are coming together right now. And basically we are going through, as you well know, the biggest technology media transformation in the nation's history, bar none. So that's right on schedule. We don't have to explain that. We're also going through, which people here might not be as well aware of, this is the biggest population transition the United States has gone through since the early 20th century. Levels of immigration in the 80s and 90s were as high as they were then, and as a percentage, and in absolute numbers bigger. And the generational change we're going through now with this millennial generation coming of age, it's the biggest generation in American history. It's a huge changeover going on. We haven't been through this kind of change in the population of the country since, again, 100 years ago. And ultimately the thing we're finding is we have to come up with these new challenges, like how do you solve global climate change? Things like that, which is like the next big wave of innovation we have to run into. So, in fact, that's what's going on. Now, what I'm going to lay out to you today is how all three of those things are starting to go. The main thing I want to focus on, since you guys are more the tech folks here, is how we're watching the fundamental paradigm shift in the technology and media sector and how that is really changing the fabric of politics. Now, when I normally do these talks, as Steve knows, I go on the Hill and stuff and explain stuff. I have to start with the basics of how the internet's changing things and how the media's changing and newspapers are going down and YouTube is this thing that goes up and it's kind of that level of. Obviously, I'm not going to do that with you guys. You get the basic technology and media change thing that's happening. But what you might not really understand is how fundamentally it is shifting politics right now. You see the surface of it, and you kind of see some of the effects, but I'm going to walk you through what's going on here. And it is literally, to use the technology term here that you guys are more familiar with, we are watching a fundamental paradigm shift in politics. It's just beginning, but it is very, very profound. Now, the way to understand it is you have to understand how politics has been run since this guy started, basically. I'm pointing at my screen. This guy started. Is really what really started happening is the dawn of broadcast television. There was essentially a model invented for politics that has been followed for 40 years here, almost completely with little change, basically, since the 60s. The explosion of innovation actually around in the early 60s. And the basic way it worked is this. It basically, you had to raise money. So the way they raised money was through wealthy donors and special interest corporations or essentially unions and others that could aggregate big chunks of money. You had to get big money, and you had to aggregate it through big, wealthy people. The second thing is the way you organized stuff was the fundamentals. You had to have the party establishment. That's how things got organized. There was no really alternative way to do it. And ultimately, the medium was all broadcast television. It was all about the 30-second ad. Now, we kind of get how that's worked through the different ways up until recently. The last election, you could say it, that was completely playing out all the way till 2000, was any person in politics who had those three bases covered, and which was almost always the establishment candidate, it was always an incumbent, it was always the kind of vice president. They were completely advantaged in this. And any kind of challenger, in this case Bill Bradley, but Gary Hart, all these people that were trying to challenge, they had no way to basically break that hold. And so you never could see real reformers actually ever break the system. Because once you had those three bases covered, you couldn't crack it. Until basically 2004. And that was the dawn of essentially a new kind of political framework. This was the beginning of this new paradigm. And this really started, as we know, from actually Howard Dean. Howard Dean cracked the model. Now, he didn't win it. It was too early. It was too rough. He himself didn't totally understand it. It was really his campaign manager, Joe Trippi, who, again, is actually a founding fellow of the New Politics Institute, which I'm directing now. Trippi was really the guy, the mastermind behind this thing. And basically what he figured out, and the traditional candidate, ultimately, Kerry, prevailed, right? Just like on cue. You know, he had all the other stuff behind him. But just to kind of look at how this new political model, the new political model does exactly very different foundation on all three of these things. For one, the paradigm shift in fundraising went to aggregating little bits from many people, the many middle class. This is a big sea change. Because and we're going to talk about how that actually scales up in a big way. The second thing is basically you realize you could organize from outside the party. Decentralized outsiders. Critical. And this is when Meetup, they started using this Meetup thing to get people to organize outside. It's stuff, no one knew how to do it, and all of a sudden they started to see it. And obviously the third one was start to use an alternative media vehicle, which is the internet and the web. These three things, and this was in the early days, 2004, was the blogs. They started thinking, oh my God, if we use these things, we can actually challenge the incumbent. Now, ultimately, couldn't basically do it fully. But it's taken to this election, and this is really the dawn. This is where it's now, Obama has taken it to a whole nother level. He has taken this thing in just 4 short years and really perfected it. Because if you look back at this campaign, which is what all the insiders, all the pundits said, Hillary had the thing locked up. In fact, back at the YouTube thing in the summer there, she was on a roll. Everyone thought she was crowned, you know, oh, this is all just going to mop everybody up. And she would have. She had all three of those bases covered incredibly well. But she didn't act, but basically people weren't factoring in that this next new model was mature enough where you could actually take it on to challenge her, which ultimately we know has happened. So what happened this cycle? Well, you took each one of those pieces basically. We are now running historic records on fundraising, which we'll go over in a second here. We're watching historic turnout, often also fueled by these new technologies and new organizational methods. And ultimately, we're watching the broadband web really make an impact in a way that's starting to challenge, not supersede yet, because television is still very important, but basically it's disrupting. All three of these things are not the only way to do politics, but they are disrupting the balance of power in the old politics and allows you to have strategic advantage if you can do these three, which is what Obama's done. And also improving the new model for sure. Now, just to make the point here, this was because people say, well, you know, maybe you just got lucky or something. What Trippi said, this is Joe Trippi actually again, the Dean guy, and he did an event with us just recently here where he used this thing. He made a point here basically that this isn't just he beat a kind of okay candidate in this old model. Hillary Clinton basically had the best model of that old model ever on the Democratic side or even probably on the Republican side. She raised more money in a nomination process the old way. She had the entire party locked up, and she basically had the best team of TV people behind her. And she lost. And she lost by only the second time we've tried this new model, and that's the Obama model. Or the Dean Obama model. It only took 4 years to come up with this, and they're already knocking down the best that we've ever seen in 40 years. And that's saying, so from now on, basically, he's saying, you will never see anyone make this mistake again. This is shot heard around the world. I've been getting all these calls from all the people all over the world, basically, now, because they're all starting to think, oh my God, this is a paradigm shift in politics. The thing to know in the big general here is McCain is a cycle behind. A total cycle behind, which in politics is light years. And basically the closest thing you could say is basically Ron Paul is essentially the Howard Dean of the Republican primary. He's basically showed how to do this, but their whole system is basically far from getting there. Now, I'm going to go to each of these three things and just give you a little bit of data, because I know you guys are data guys, data people. And I'm going to basically give you some numbers that really show that we're making this paradigm shift from the fat cat to basically the many folks here. So here's the first basic evidence here. This is the 2003 in the cycle there. Again, the gray is John Kerry, the established candidate, right? And that's Howard Dean in the first quarter. Second quarter, oh, Dean's catching up. Third quarter, oh my gosh, where is this Dean coming from? And fourth quarter, he's blowing him away. That big two jumps on those quarters is what popped everybody's eyes and said, oh my God, what is going on here? Now, ultimately, we know he got beat for a bunch of reasons. It's not just about money. You have to do a lot of things differently. But anyhow, that raised everybody's kind of eyes. Now, so we go to this one, this cycle, 4 years later. Look at the numbers here. Hillary is the light pink there. You got Barack in the middle there, and you got McCain there. So the first quarter, you go, okay, traditional candidate, challenger. Okay, still kind of interesting, close. This is the summer. That's the doldrums there in the third quarter. But then here it starts going. Fourth quarter, it's about even. You're starting to go, okay, this is where she's still kind of, this is again the fall there. But then all of a sudden, January, whoops, look at Barack. Whoops, look at February. Whoops, look at March. And again, these are by month, not quarter. So you've got to add all three of these up on top of each other to get to there. That's the difference of what's going on here. And this is just, again, and it's just starting on a roll. So how does that work? Well, it's the obvious thing. You're in tech. Tech scales incredibly. Once you crack the technology and the mind shift, scaling is just, anybody understands that it's Google and YouTube, basically, right? Once it's done, you basically just start filling it out. So how does this work in politics? This is the old model. You get 100,000 people given the maximum contribution, which is what they do, which is kind of the Hillary thing. You can make a serious amount of money, right? That's what it used to take to run, basically, in the general. But, you take basically 1.5 million contributors, which is what basically Barack already has here. You throw in just 200 as an average, and you've actually got more money then, right? But look at what's going to happen here in the general here, because it's not going to be 1.5 million. It's going to be, let's say, 5 million. They're going to throw, let's just take a low ball, $100 there. Some will obviously max out and all. You're talking $500 million. This is money we've never seen basically get into politics. And then you start thinking about paradigm shift here. You go, where does it stop? Could you get 30 million people throwing in $100? That's $3 billion. Oops, sorry, I'm going a little fast there. $3 billion. That's, now that's a little crazy. 30 million is a lot. But anyhow, it's really blowing the doors off the old paradigm. So the paradigm shift in organizing, again, from the Ward Heel guy to the basically bottom-up folks. People are looking at all this turnout going on here. Like, well, what is going on? Well, look at the Dems, for example. Basically, they started with that. They almost doubled now over the 2004 primary. They've also almost doubled what the Republicans have done here. Well, what is going on there? Well, a lot of it is starting to be this new kind of way to get organized. So what are the young generation, the millennial generation? Look at those numbers there. They're doubling the turnout, basically, from just 4 years ago. Is that just interest in the election? Hey, 2004 people were interested in the election. It's basically you're able to get people out in way, way new ways. Look at also the difference between the Republicans and the Democrats here. Look at this, California. This is a blue. All the blues are up. And they're just, it's, again, because you guys see all this new energy going in through this new way of doing politics. Hispanic record turnout here all across the board. This is, by the way, asterisk, because this is twice as high. It's that high, really. It would have scrolled, you wouldn't have been able to see the numbers here in California, and it basically goes up to about here in Texas. But the point is, huge numbers from just 4 years ago, right? They're coming out. The other thing is, if you look between the parties, again, these things still go up. Again, it's just getting dwarfing what's happening on the Republican side. Now, some of this is because of policies and politics and all that. But it's also a lot about the organizational methods to do this. What's happening? Social networking. Politics has always been about social networking. Now you've got these tools that actually supercharge it. Again, the Obama campaign is doing a masterful job if you go into My Barack Obama and others. And, you're seeing how all these things are really, really kicking out here. Paradigm shift. So what used to happen in politics is you'd have a small team, centralized staff that would move the candidate around. You basically leverage off broadcast television, right? Basically now, because of the network effect of social networking and all the other things we know about this, you got millions of people every day who are going to be able to be tied into politics. Which circle would you rather have? It's pretty obvious. Again, paradigm shift stuff. And the third paradigm shift here, which is more your guys' space, is the media paradigm shift. And again, this is an interesting one. And still the numbers are kind of curious here. You guys will probably watch this. If you look at total ad spending, this is just of all ads spent in politics. This is not just for one candidate, but for all candidates. 2002 is $1 billion. 2004 it went up. 2006, you're up to basically, it's hard to read there, $2.6 billion. So this is the same year, if you break it down between one end of the TV is the pink there, and that's not TV, right? Spending. And basically, so this is all internet spending and stuff. So look at the lion's share, and this is what's expected to go to TV this year. The lion's share of political advertising is overwhelmingly, it's huge numbers basically of television money, right? Well, this is what the candidates basically have just done up to date here, basically roughly up to date here. So, you're still putting a ton of money, and Barack himself in there. But basically what's interesting, this is a different scale now. This is aggregating these three into this. This is how much people have put into internet ads compared to what they put into television ads. This is just for these three candidates, right? It's crazy. From the point of view of the internet world, it's like, what's going on? Now, I will say within this, place, there's actually an interesting dynamic that this is just taken, for example, February Google ads for you guys. Basically, Barack is putting in about $1 million a month on Google ads. So he is actually shifting. But still, in the grand scheme of media, very little money moving that way. Now, that means, frankly, that's a mistake and that's going to shift. But it is still saying where the lion's share of energy goes. But here's your guys' stuff. YouTube video views, which, you guys can tell me more about this or not. But, the numbers are starting to get very serious now. With Obama, well up into, and I don't know, maybe you got the latest ones here, but basically, serious eyeballs. But not the eyeballs, frankly, that we're going to see on TV. I'll go through in a while. But, you're starting to see these incredible numbers here. Average number of views, average length of minutes of his top 10 or 13 minutes. It's crazy. This race speech, it's wild. That's, that's been viewed in that kind of entirety 4 million times. Anyhow, so you guys know that, but it's interesting to start seeing this. Well, political web video, it explodes. Now, it's going into this. Now, so you guys know this, so in a weird way, I don't know if I need to go show you this. But I'll just throw this. And for those that hadn't seen this closely, it's worth watching again.
And that's really good. I intend to keep telling you exactly where I stand on all of the issues.
I'm looking at how to help you and other people who are hardworking like you. And I've really been impressed by how serious people are.
Because we all need to be part of the discussion if we're all going to be part of the solution.
I don't want people who already agree with me. I want honest, experienced, hardworking, patriotic people who want to be part of a team, the American team. I hope you've learned a little bit more about what I'm believing and trying to do, and really helped this conversation about our country to get started.
I hope to keep this conversation going all the way to November 2008.
I don't know how many of you know that. I mean, maybe it's familiar here, but it's worth reminding ourselves. This came out just in February. It was extreme, not this February, the February before. And when this came up, it was the beginning of a kind of new phenomenon, as you well know, mashup kind of thing. But it took politics by complete storm. It was like, oh my God. And it was so prescient. I mean, basically this called the election. This is calling exactly what's happening now. It was amazing. It happened over a year and a half ago almost. And it was really showing how this whole different dynamic was going to come up against that whole broadcast kind of controlled down, top-down thing. Now, again, I don't know, there's maybe well be Hillary people here and all that. I don't want to get into the partisan side of the ideas here, but it is in terms of the approach to politics. This was very much on pack. By the way, this had nothing to do with the Barack Obama campaign. It was a guy completely freelancing outside. And it was a mystery for a while in the whole thing, if you know that. Now, again, you guys are the YouTube people, so I don't necessarily need to know this, but what's interesting, I will just throw this one, which is kind of trying, this old politics is also trying to adapt to it. So actually, Hillary has tried to adapt to this, but, this is an example of the...
2-3 weeks, we were maybe the hottest band around.
Suddenly, there's this huge audience. Everybody's crammed against the wall.
Hillary takes the stage. The crowd went nuts.
Changed everything. Everything.
The reaction was just phenomenal.
Some people called it the comeback of the guitar solo.
She gave us an edge.
The blogs were going crazy.
They were going crazy, but it got a YouTube rating 2 out of 5. This was manufactured by the campaign. It wasn't a bottom-up thing. It didn't have the genuine side to it. It actually flopped. And anyhow, it's a good example of how politics is having a hard time adapting to it. Now, just to kind of wind this up, though, there is an eyeball gap, and the hardest thing I have to explain to people in politics is that, hey, TV, because they say TV's seen by so many more people, it's like, it just doesn't make any sense. So I'm basically telling, I'm preaching the converted here, but this is the paradigm shift that's happening here is, these are the characteristics that are actually being brought to politics into basically from I'm not talking again to the converted here, but this thing that you can watch as long as you want versus 30 seconds is huge. The idea that you can kind of immediately get to fundraising. This is what's driving his fundraising in many respects. People get passionately connected to the video and they basically say, I want to do something. You can't do that with TV, right? You have to figure out where am I going to send the mail and would I send a check or would I find them on the web or where do I go? Anyhow, it's showing this is a big disruptor. Again, you guys know this, but this is something that really we're trying to explain to politics. Now, what I want to show here is, the thing that you guys know, again, I go to political people and say, okay, here's the thing. Think of a medium that basically you get things produced for free, you get things distributed for free, you place this thing, or the thing gets shown locally, nationally, and globally. It's magic. I mean, compared to old broadcast television, which was extremely expensive, it basically, you had to buy whatever little space, and you couldn't even buy globally. Anyhow, the idea that this is a paradigm shift, you guys get, but this is really having a hard time sticking it to politics, but it is happening. So to sum up the paradigm shift thing here, what's happening now is you're watching a politics that's organized around money from the wealthy, or wealthy entities like corporations, to the many, many, many. You're watching a shift from the organizational core thing, the party, to essentially things outside the party, which is now people-oriented or kind of bottom-up oriented. And ultimately, you're watching a politics organized around TV to one organized around the broadband web. This is a fundamental shift here. Now, that doesn't mean you still have to play on this side now, which is what Brock and others are doing. But this is the beginning of the new thing, and increasingly what you're going to see is the shift of the power dynamic of politics going to these three. And that is essentially your guys' world. You're certainly here, but you're essentially around the viral stuff and ultimately aggregation. And this is the world that's essentially disrupting politics, not just in this country, but around the world. So the fundamental thing going on here, I would say, is this top-down, bottom-up dynamic. That's the meta paradigm shift. And right now, to be honest with you, it's about here. If you would have asked me last summer, you would have said, top down's probably going to win yet again. That was when everyone thought Hillary was going to win, right? But anyhow, I think we're about here now, and I think ultimately, though, the direction is we're going to basically watch a politics shift this way, which is good for democracy, good for participation. Reminder, McCain is a cycle behind. I would say this is not being factored into the fall election here, and I refrain from making a total prediction here, but I would say everyone's looking at this kind of neck-and-neck thing. I think it's going to be much different. I think you're going to watch a very different, it's like this whole new juggernaut that's being unleashed. People are not factoring in all the people working and all the new tools that are going to be used here. And ultimately, I think it's going to be old politics versus new politics, and that is really going to be a huge, huge difference, and it's going to make a big difference in the number of votes there. Now, does that end up in this kind of opening up this new progressive era? And I'm just going to wind up here, and so we have time for a little question. But I want to basically touch on these last two areas here briefly, which is the tech shift, the media shift's happening. But the demographic thing you need to have, and you basically need to have the ideas. And I just want to quickly mention to you about this new American population. I want to point out two constituencies that are absolutely critical here. This millennial generation is the biggest generation in American history. Here is the American population. I just want to this is put out to 2015. This is an age pyramid, which in the old days used to be a total pyramid. These are the boomers here that are basically, going to break the bank of the Social Security that everyone's worrying about. What people are not factoring in here is the millennial generation. By 2015, it will be totally voting age. It'll be 83 million of them. This is the biggest generation in American history. It is going to have the impact that the boomers had on culture, on the economy, on everything, and on politics. That is the thing that's going to be one of the critical pieces here. If we had more time, we can get into this thing. But what's interesting about this thing is that the most diverse generation in American history, 40% are minorities, and most endowed, I would say, in terms of the educational background, the most globally oriented, which is by the first generation that really gets the global thing, civic-minded and optimistic. It is a totally win-win kind of thing for politics, basically, and they're born into this new world. These are the folks that aren't going to just pull levers to vote. They're going to create the new world. It's very, very good for progressive America to progressive politics. The other one is the Hispanic thing, and you know that a little bit from sitting here in California. But if you run the numbers out to 2050, this is the American population. We've just passed 300 million, basically. But this is the thing that people really underestimate. 1 in 4 Americans is going to be Hispanic descent by 2050. This is huge. And again, if they're trending to one party or one movement, that's a huge basis of driving a kind of long-term coalition, and that's essentially what seems to be happening here. Ultimately, here too, people might not recognize this. Already, all these border states are well over a third Hispanic. And look, even into the heartland here, it's starting to be, serious kind of penetration into Hispanics here. This is really fundamentally changing the country. Now, I wind up with our 21st century challenges. And this is actually where Google and Google.org, I've been really pushing on this. This is the most immature part of this whole thing I talked about. These people are coming together into politics. The technology is shifting politics. What is not adequately figured out is what the heck is this country going to do for the next 10 or 20 years to totally take on the 21st century that way we have to do it. Global warming is, without question, the most mind-boggling problem this country has ever faced. And it's just one of the problems. Because we certainly haven't figured out how to deal with decentralized terrorism, particularly weapons of mass destruction, which we all were just freaked out about 4 or 5 years ago. That hasn't gone away. Biotech, loose nukes, all that stuff. And ultimately, the globalization of the economy is fundamentally tearing the fabric up of this country, and it's breaking down the coalition of what brings Americans together. This is really starting to be serious, serious. Any one of these challenges, folks, there's about I just throw up a dozen of them here. Any one of these would be extremely difficult problems to solve in 10 to 20 years, and we have to basically deal with all of them simultaneously. Every one of these things has to basically have some kind of incredibly structural, fundamental shifting of big ideas, fundamental way that we basically come to terms with very, very unique, unprecedented problems and come at them in new ways. Now, the good news is there are incredible good ideas coming all over the place. Coming all out of every one of those areas is tons of great ideas. They haven't penetrated government, they haven't penetrated politics necessarily, but they are certainly coming up all over the place in all these different sectors. Again, Google.org and others are starting to really kind of tease these things out in very cool ways. And ultimately, I'd say, we're sitting here in California, I would not do this in the East Coast, but I would say this really, particularly Northern California, is really ground zero for a lot of the new thinking about how we're basically going to solve these very, very fundamental challenges, not just to this country, but to humanity. And we are really going to be in a great place for the next 20 years or so. So to finish here, I would say, at each of these junctures in American history, the set of generations that have come together at that period, at the time, have been faced with what they thought were just completely overwhelming, daunting things like the Great Depression. This thing, FDR, this is, we look back on FDR as, wow, they solved all this, the Great Depression and all that. The New Deal, folks, if you go back and look at the time there, which I've done an extensive amount of work on this, he had no idea what the New Deal was. It was a slogan they wrote on an envelope, basically, on the campaign trail. When he went into office on Inauguration Day, he had no clue what to do. He shut down the banking system on Inauguration Day for 10 days and said, get everybody we know who knows something about banking into the room, and we're going to figure out at the end of 10 days what the hell to do, which is what they did. And they started rapidly just experimenting. That's the great 100 days, was just crazy experimentation because they had no idea what to do. Yet 15 years later, they had basically set up a system for the 20th century that basically worked for the last 50 years. We're still running on the same system. UN, IMF, all the stuff we're still doing, right? Ultimately, that's what we're up against today. We're in a similar situation. It looks like, how are we going to solve global warming? How are we going to deal with all this stuff? But we are more endowed. We have more resources. We got more tools. Like, who would have thought you could go to a box? If you told FDR, you go to a box and type in any question in the world and you get all the world's information and answers back and be like, it's magic. That's Google, right? I mean, it's like we have a ton of resources and assets there. And so when I go to audiences and say, this is really an exciting time, and I'll put it back all to you, it's like, this is really the time to step up, not just as a company or not just for what you're doing in your day job, but as citizens, as just people participating in this country at this moment here. And so I challenge all you to step up for the next 20 years here and help figure out this problem. Anyhow, that's it. Thanks. These are various ways to get a hold of me. We're affiliated with NDN, which is Simon Rosenberg's organization in Washington, D.C. This is my way to get a hold of me. And also, you can always get me at my peterleyden.org way. Anyhow, you want to do some questions?
Yeah, we have another 15 minutes here for questions.
Hi, Peter. Thanks so much for coming. We think about this stuff a lot, and it's just great to see it presented in such a clear, compelling way. So thank you very much for that.
Thanks.
I've personally never really understood why I can't vote from Starbucks, let alone my mobile phone or my desktop. So I wonder, is there a paradigm shift coming in voting? And if so, what kind of impact would that have?
Well, what's interesting, right now, unfortunately, there's been a backlash against more electronic and more simple, voting. I mean, I was actually in the 90s in Wired, I would often promote it, how this is obviously going to be electronic and be kind of internetized, and there are validation ways that you could do it that would be safe and secure and all that. But I think with this whole voting machine problem and this whole paranoia in the general public about manipulation of it and how are we going to keep records of it and how do you double check and who gets the code, and I think it's really set this back really seriously. I mean, here in California, the one state you'd think would ever have it together, you know, we're going back to paper ballots, you know. I mean, it's unfortunately we're taking one step forward, two steps back. I think ultimately, though, it's definitely going to happen, and it's just a matter of just making sure that, you know, the technology works and getting people confident enough. And again, as this millennial generation is a good example of, you know, a generation that is totally comfortable with this stuff, becoming increasingly kind of running the country or involved in the country. I think those kind of things will dissipate away. I mean, I remember when it literally in Wired, I remember like as late as 97, 98, people were saying people will never give their credit cards over the internet. You know, there's no way people are going to buy that. It's like, it's not safe, and it's kind of nutty kind of thing that we look back on like. And I think it'll be the same with voting over time. Yeah, another question?
Thanks for coming. It was interesting. I saw you at Google several months ago, so to see how the competition has changed after this election cycle. I had two kind of questions to put together about. Do you think the Electoral College, as it is set up, is a barrier or help to, say, you know, creating these new majorities that you talk so much about? Because it seems to me that makes it more about winning certain places as opposed to winning everywhere. And a follow-up to that would be, in creating these majorities that you talk about, with, say, you know, Obama's massive voter registration drive that he wants to do over the next several months, as well as these increases in youth turnout, these bottom-up organizing through his website. To what extent do you think, either in percentage points or raw votes, that those things give a bump that we perhaps don't see?
Sure. Just do I need to repeat that question? But I mean, is it for the video or for the video conferencing? The basic question, I'll just repeat it since you did have it, was he's talking about, you saw a previous version of this, actually. Simon Rosenberg, my kind of colleague at DA, and I did this before. We actually did a kind of electoral map of how this could actually sustain large majorities. He was asking to what extent Electoral College actually gets in the way here. I'll just talk about that one first. First of all, I think it's going to be extremely difficult to change the Electoral College system. You know, that'll take time with a lot of big majorities. But the good news is, I think, we're actually on the verge here of the potential for large majorities in through the current Electoral College system for, I would say, I would call a progressive president, and also huge majorities in Congress. Basically, the only way you get basic transformational change through in politics is you get two ways. You either have one party completely dominate, or you basically have a total bipartisan coalition. And mostly it's been one party overwhelmingly in power, which is what happened with FDR all the way through Kennedy through the 60s into the 70s. That kind of transformational change, you had huge majorities in both Congress houses, and you had huge electoral majorities. Now, that is and people, you know, keep thinking about this razor-thin 50-50 country here. There is something that people don't fully recognize, is the Democrats have actually held 248 electoral votes for the last 4 cycles, rock solid base. There's a base of those many, you know, that haven't budged and aren't going to budge, that are basically a baseline. All you need is 270, right? So the question is, and there's various ways you can tip with little states. We used to always fight around, you know, Ohio or something. It is potentially you could push that Electoral College way over 300 with this kind of shifting that maybe Obama, I think, can do here. And that's the kind of margins you need to actually say things like, hey, we're going to put in a carbon tax. So you're not, you know, and we're going to do some transformational things to deal with climate change. That isn't going to give you a backlash, and you're going to lose that little vote in Ohio, and it's going to flip the whole election next time. So you need the big margins. Fortunately, actually, there is a lot of calculations and other talks I have in ways to show the map how this would work. But Obama is throwing this whole thing in play, and that was your second question of how he's doing this. I think that is a complete sleeper issue that people are not understanding, is that he, through this entire nomination, has energized a party outside party at a party apparatus in every 50 states. They're pushing hard to get new people in to vote. The historic turnout's been so high that it's just blown the doors off of anything we've seen previously. And I think this whole thing is going to just keep continuing, a seething kind of charge here toward the end here. And I think it's just going to blow out the doors on turnout. It's going to blow out the doors on people registering. It's going to blow out the doors on what we think of as that razor-thin 50-50 red-blue America. And I think we're going to watch a different coalition come in the fall. Now, again, I'm an optimist. I'm also coming at it from more the Democrat or progressive side. But I think it's pretty sound analysis to say that we're at the cusp here of a real shifting. Now, this, again, has happened historically frequently. The election, you know, with the Depression, with the Hoover election, 32, there was a huge surge off Hoover to great majorities across the board for FDR and the Democrats. And I think you could make a very good argument here that Bush is doing for the Republicans what Hoover did for the Republicans back then, and for conservatism, and actually causing a real shift that will be quite dramatic in the fall and for a while here. It's going to be a long time until people are going to go back to conservatism as the driving force of America. They're gun shy for about a decade at least, if not a generation, I would say. Go ahead.
Yeah, I had a quick question, and I'm trying to avoid the partisan feel of this, but it seems like you're on Capitol Hill. You're giving this presentation out to those folks, both on the Democrat and Republican side, and you're saying McCain's a cycle behind. I mean, are you talking to McCain's people? Are you talking to Republicans? Are they sensing this kind of doomsday scenario that they're falling behind? You figure they're seeing the votes, being tallied, and they're seeing what the success of Obama's campaign is, but. I mean, are they going to turn it around? Are they actionable? Going to be doing something in November?
There is a lot of distress going on. There is a lot. I mean, it's obvious. They're analyzing this. They're looking at this. They're seeing his fundraiser. They're seeing all these pieces. They're maybe seeing it as crisply as I'm laying it out here to you. Frankly, this is all just coming into clear focus for a lot of people right now. In fact, there's a wave. I think Steve mentioned this in the Night Monthly, or did you mention? I think the Night Monthly piece. Anyhow, there's a wave of magazine pieces right now that are starting to piece together this. Oh my God, what's really happening? Thing. That actually some of them I've been involved with. And so this is like new thinking. So people are trying to like, okay, I'm starting to get it. And there is clearly a sense of distress going on the Republican side about this. There are people comparable to me in the Republican side who are really doing everything they can. But the problem is this isn't something that you can just switch on okay, let's do the web way. It's not about just, hey, let's get a server, let's throw up a website. As you well know, it's a mindset thing. It's a whole shift in the culture. It's a whole kind of letting go of control. It's a whole empowering all kinds of different people. And Obama, through his movement orientation and through his people like Chris Hughes from Facebook is one of his key tech people. I mean, he's got an organization that's made that shift. You're not going to be able to do that in 6 months. And I think it's even going to take 4 years. Now, ultimately, though, the parties will basically equalize on this. And this is exactly what happened with broadcast television. Broadcast television, the Democrats completely dominated that in the early 60s. They were the experimenters. They did all the great stuff with the debates and with the early advertising, the Daisy ad, and all the different ways they used television. But by 68, Nixon, the guy who had gotten blown out of the water by TV in 1960 debate, in 68 he had Madison Avenue working for him and he basically won the election. It equalizes itself once the new paradigm is established and people really get how to do it. And this will be the same, but it won't happen in 6 months, in my opinion. Other questions from folks?
I have one. Oh, sorry.
Okay.
Yeah, question is two questions actually. One, can you give us any insight into running mates that you might know? And two, what do you think it looks like as all of the candidates, you say Obama right now is the only one who has this new model down. As everyone gets the new model down, what does that look like in the future?
The running mate thing I'll just totally punt on, because frankly, my colleague, for example, Simon Rosenberg, who helped me with a lot of these things in D.C., is much more the insider there. I mean, I would say you probably look to a white male, just at a pure demographic sense, and probably someone on the who has more military chops, which would be the two things he'd want to bring. Maybe a governor that would have something that could show some executive background. So generically, that kind of whittles it down. There's not a ton of people to think about from that. But I won't necessarily make a total call on that one. But I would say that would be the way to think about it. But in terms of the new model, no. What happens in American politics is the presidential cycles are the innovative, explosive periods. And basically, it's where all the energy goes. It's where the public goes. Everyone's watching it. And it sets the standard. And so and it has the money to do it and the resources to actually do things new. Once something new happens there, then it gets driven down through the system. And so I would say right now there's very few examples of how senators' campaigns or, Secretary of State of California or, there's a few examples that, you might see of some of these. But mostly these places are not using it, and let alone down to the kind of legislative level or, local mayors and stuff. But this is what happens, is the new model goes, people get it, it gets distributed out, people like me kind of proselytize, we basically drive it through the system, and ultimately it becomes the way to go. And there's nothing that drives adoption like success. And once somebody does it successfully, people go, I'm doing that. And that's what I think you're going to see here. So, yeah, I would say this is, it won't necessarily be this. In 5-10 years, there'll be some modifications on this roughly, but the basic shift pieces are starting to be clear now that you're going to put your energy into not, the high net worth local parties to squeeze all your money out. You're going to have someone who understands how to raise little bits of money from all kinds of people. That is like a no-brainer. And that's going to happen to everybody, from city council all the way up to president over time. Anyway.
Does that become, in a way, like who can make the best videos and who can have the best, maybe like the hippest candidate, which the internet caters to a little more than the...
That's interesting. Yeah, I would say it will affect the culture of politics, the kind of campaigner. One is you got to roll with the punches. You got to be more kind of transparent of who you are. You can't be as manipulative. I would say hipness is going to affect more, but that's kind of also hipness has always been a American thing. People always want the hip thing. I mean, JFK was about as hip as they get back in those days, right? Now that doesn't mean we've always had hip presidents, that's for sure. But but I mean, the ultimate ideal of a political candidate is hip. But yeah, no, I think it's going to create a different kind of political candidate. I mean, Obama is an interesting thing. I think about it. This is a little weird kind of reflection, which I haven't really thrown out publicly, but I was thinking about this the other day. Is like what's interesting about Obama is, he was raised by a boomer mother. So he has actually a lot of commonality in terms of how he grew up to a lot of these millennials, which are basically raised and were born and raised by boomers who basically had those kids a lot later, but his mother had it right when she was very young. So there's this kind of weird generational thing that's not just not a boomer. There's like something that he's been raised with a worldview that's very different. And so there's something that's really resonating deeply with these young millennials about just who he is, because it's really closer to them than, in fact, it even lets on with his age and stuff. Anyhow, that's an oddball thing, but I've been thinking about it. It's kind of an interesting thing. He's got something different here that goes beyond just, an outsider the way he is. Any last, Steve, you had a question? There's a guy in the back there, too.
Yeah. What do you think let me give you this real quick since we're back there. Thanks. What do you think some of the new risks are that come along with new use of technology, new paradigm that haven't been seen before?
Well, you guys know this. I mean, the great... you mean risk to society or risk to candidates and stuff? Or you mean...
I would say both. Like the Reverend Wright thing is kind of a new kind of a risk to a candidate, or... Yeah, if there are any risks.
Well, the clear thing for candidates is the biggest risk is you're basically... It's and the Macaca video and the kind of 2006 cycle really exposed this first piece is... From now on, politics is much more transparent than ever. That was like, you're on all the time, you can always be seen, there's always going to be someone with a camera on you. It could be a cell phone as, the bitter comments and all kinds of ways that you're getting captured in ways that you'd never had before. So the transparency that a candidate now faces is huge. Now, you can take it two ways. You can kind of say, some people say, oh my God, I got to control everything. I got to be totally on message every minute of the day. Others say, you know what, I just have to adapt a more fluid kind of way of campaigning where, you know what, I say something wrong, I come back at it, and, I'm sorry, and do something differently. We're watching a different kind of style evolve here. It isn't quite there yet, but it's starting to evolve. But in terms of the larger problems to democracy, because that's actually, people do raise this issue of, having all these people kind of, able to create videos and everybody able to comment and everyone able to blog. I mean, this is the rabble. It's going to just get out of control. It's going to be bad for democracy. I think that's totally wrong. And I think every time in American history where we've opened the political system up to more people and more voices and more diverse perspectives, in the long run, it's been crazy and disruptive at the time, but every time you've done it, it made a more robust society and ultimately a wiser polity and one that we want to be a part of. And so I think any effort to democratize and make politics more participatory in the long run is a good thing for our society. And I think it's messy and it has new dangers and it's going to create new models of what kind of candidates we need, and it's going to have its ups and downs, But ultimately the trend line is completely positive in my opinion. And it's a great thing. And again, you guys are basically a part of this democratization of politics, this increasing transparency in politics, and it is something that's you should be very proud of. I mean, it's a great thing for our country and the world. I've been doing it. I was talking to Steve over lunch. It's like I was just at a conference here at Stanford where I was talking about politics, and it was mostly a foreign crowd. It was people from Scandinavia and Europe, and a bunch of Pakistan people. Anyhow, it was a funny kind of mix of foreigners. But they're totally watching what's going on in politics right now. They're absolutely fascinated by it. And they see the implications for their own societies. And they see it, and they're actually really energized by it. And I think this is something we kind of lose track of a little bit here, is that, what's happening in this country is cracking a new model, and hopefully will re-energize and revitalize our own country here in America, which God knows we need some work on that. But it's also cracking a new model, I think, that globally is being understood as a new model for more participatory, democratized, people-oriented politics that is a good thing, not just here, but in Europe and Asia and all over. And I think it's that global dimension that we lose track of, and I think it's one we should hang on to. Again, I guess we're kind of coming to the end of the time here. I would just say, as I said at the beginning of this talk, we are really living in an extraordinary moment in American history. I really believe that they're going to be looking at this period of the early 21st century here, and this shifting literally now in politics and in turning our attention to these great new challenges like climate change as one of the great moments, of American history. We could screw it up, and we could go down as a generation that, screwed it up for 30 years that are, and then they had to fix it by 2050. But I think we're actually at the moment where we could do this, and I think it's going to be a great, I think it's something that we're looking at. Just like we look back and we say, God, wasn't it amazing in Civil War and Abraham Lincoln and those guys, they figured out slavery and they set up the late, anyhow, the things that do that, that's the kind of way they're going to look at this. And I think we kind of lose track of that big picture, but all the pieces are in place for us to rise to that challenge. So let's do it. Oh, you got a question here?
Oh yeah, on the last slide you had a list of all those issues we're going to have to deal with in this series. And I was wondering, as a company, do you think it's enough for us to just be a platform where people can organically connect around those issues, or do you think we have to be more proactive about them? And if so, what do you think that looks like?
Well, that's a good question. I know that Google.org, I'm not sure if people are on, but I was talking with them earlier, and they were going to come into this video conference. I can't tell if that's them on this thing. But I actually think, I think that your company, Google in general, and YouTube, as kind of also in the family, are in a very unique position, and it has you have an opportunity here to really help stimulate this or catalyze this change in a way that I think few companies could do right now. And I think you have a lot of the elements going. You're doing great stuff. I don't want to say you're not, what you're doing isn't enough, but I would say I think at this stage to catalyze really big ideas in all these areas and provide the platform for many, many Americans to plug into this outside of government, but in a way that could be constructive, feed into politics and feed into government, I think would be a very, very, to be a fantastic thing. And I have some thoughts actually on how to do that in a more specific way, which is too much for this discussion. But I think what is needed right now, the fundamental problem that's going on right now, we have these challenges, right, and everyone recognizes them, which is a big deal, because 5 years ago we were fighting over whether climate change even existed, right? But we're at least to the point where we see the problems. And the other good piece of it is that we've got tons of fantastic ideas out there about what to do about new energy, clean energies, all kinds of things, global development, global health, all the stuff we know. The difference is we haven't really linked what's going on in the private sector, the social entrepreneur space, all these other, and all the scenes that are going on in universities, with a coherent strategies in government and politics through politics. And I think that could be accelerated very quickly, making those linkages. And I think providing a platform and a way to stimulate that, kind of catalyze that kind of connections, I think is something that Google and YouTube could actually help on. And I think that would be a incredibly great thing to do. And it's great what you're doing in certain areas, but I think we need a dozen of them, or we need much more kind of systemic kind of ways to do this. And I think you could help do that. But that's another discussion here. We got another question?
Yeah, I had one question for you. I was thinking back to when Tony Blair got elected and New Labour got elected in the UK, and it certainly felt like change, and it was transformational, and it was the old Conservative guard were, stepping back, and the new reforming team were coming in, and now looking at it, it has all become very stagnant. And, the situation in Europe is very much a case that conservatism and technology can actually coexist, and swings towards in the UK in the past couple of weeks, there are arguments about religion and embryos and things like that. What do we do to make sure that we're not sitting here 10 years from now going, well, we thought that guy Barack was going to come in and change things, but it turned out he was, for want of a better word, a politician.
Well, that's a good. It's a good comment. It's one that kind of comes up frequently. I guess what I'm explaining here, what I hope I'm communicating here actually, is that this isn't really about Barack Obama, although he had the vision and the kind of understanding of these tools and also the forward motion of how to pull this together. And he's brilliant, in many respects. But I think what he's good at doing, which is, it's not, the first thing you come to his website, every speech he says it is like, it's not about me, it's about you. It's about a movement, it's about all of us, And I think that's really true. I mean, I think it'd be a great loss if the guy wasn't here. But I do think this is going to happen anyhow. I think what's happening on a more structural level, and there's some debates on, how much is dependent on great leaders and how much is really just structurally happens anyhow. I think I'm more of the camp that, this is an emergent thing that's just going to happen. And it kind of forces up the right leaders come together. But if it wasn't that leader, it'd be another leader. I think the world is at a moment here. I think we're coming off a 25-year run of conservatism and conservative ideas that, again, in a nonpartisan way, they did incredible good things. There was a lot of things that we shifted the fundamentals of the economy. There were a lot of things about ending the Cold War, a bunch of stuff that was very positive about what happened in that era. But ultimately, there were things that just wasn't dealing with what essentially is the emerging 21st century. It's coming to an end. It's going down for a while. And in the cycles of American history, we're watching a birth of a different kind of approach to how to do politics. More people-oriented, more future-oriented, more experimental, more forward-thinking rather than conserving and traditional and thinking back to the first principles, which is more conservative eras. I think that's opening up regardless of anybody, Barack or anybody, and he'll catalyze it and accelerate it, I think, and hopefully do fantastic, but ultimately we're moving into that. Now, it's true, there was a false start in 1992. A lot of people thought, Clinton was going to change everything. The problem with Clinton was in the context of a larger conservative era. He was a Democrat, but he was trapped he was constrained by the general arc of the conservative era of that 25-year run that the country was in. And I think now we're watching that era closing, a new era coming. And so it's not a matter of one misstepped administration. It's going to be more, we're either going to go down in a big way here. I mean, it's not just going to be a stumble here or there. It's going to be problematic. And as you all know, I mean, these problems are not just, oh gosh, well, if we don't solve that, it'll be fine. It's like fundamental. We're either going to be in a really problematic situation in 10, 20, 30 years here, or we're going to change it. So anyhow, my sense is, although I'm clearly an optimist, I think it's grounded on some pretty good fundamentals that were based on some real analysis that we're entering a very, very amazing time here. So thanks for coming.
Pete, thanks for coming. Yeah, we'd love to have you back after the election. See what you said.
That's right. Good, thank you.